person would recognize the whole. To get to that much very so he suggests that Chazal were hesitant to put that in as a mitzvah that we ask for every single day. And we understand that the most powerful tool that we have, the greatest chance that we have to be zeichin our tefillas is if we can turn to the Baruch Hu and say that we're working to avoid Malchus Shamayim. That if we turn to the Baruch Hu and we say we have this long list of requests, how can we have requests? If it's Baruch Hu's day, it's not my day. The Baruch Hu becomes Melech today. It's Bari Olam today. So I request. I come in as I have a din on my head. So whoever heard of a person coming to a court and Chayim and Bisa Fluyi and Yoga, and he comes with a request. He wants good health. He wants children. He wants nachas. It's a strange situation. So the terrorist is because we come to the Baruch and we say that if we are zoch and getting the brachos that we're looking for, we will enhance Kvod Shema. We will enhance the Baruch Hu's brachos. The Baruch Hu gives us life. So it'll be another year, Be'ez Hashem, with many years when we're davening, we're learning, we're doing mitzvah, doing tzedakah, we're teaching the Kodesh Baruch Hu, when we're being Mekani Shem Shach. The Baruch Hu gives us health, so we're going to use that health in order to be able to do greater Kvod Shemayim, more mitzvahs, more chesed, more for the tzibur. The Baruch Hu gives us prosperity, more tzedakah. Our request in Yom Neiron is Galei Kavod Malchuscha, and we want to be a part of that. And whatever bracha we get, we will use for greater Kvod Malchus. So since that's the most powerful tefillah, and that's how we come to the Baruch Hu. We come to the Baruch Hu with our long list because we're saying that's L'man Hashem. We said Zachreinu L'Chayim L'Chayim L'Chosfeidu L'Sefer L'man L'Lekim Chayim. It's all L'man. The end of the sequel, we have a long paragraph L'man. So comes Yom Neiron and the Piv the Libo Shov. When we ask for Malchus Kvod Shemayim, we're there because we understand that the brachos we're asking for are the brachos which will increase Kvod Shemayim. So Druk suggests that that's why on Yom Neiron Chazal had the optimism, called it the chutzpah, to say that a simple Jew can say because we're saying to the Baruch Hu, if you give us the koyach to speak and to daven, so we're going to daven for take b'achtocha. And our words are going to be words that are marvi Kvod Shemayim. I want to finish up with a few words about Malchus. The first bracha. Why Malchus? Because one of the most impressive comments in preparation for Yom Neiron. We mentioned this last year to the Torah Maggid said. When we come to Rosh Hashana, and one of the mitzvahs in Rosh Hashana is to announce that the Baruch Hu sovereignty. So he said, we are prepared to come to Yom Tov Rosh Hashana and have the tshuva. We will accomplish some measure of tshuva. We will accomplish some kabbalas and giving tshuva. Right? But we come to the Baruch Hu on Yom Tov Rosh Hashana, and we're davening for the Baruch Hu's malchus, and we haven't thought about it before Yom Tov. So what's our request going to be? How are we going to, at a moment's notice, when we turn the page in the Machzor, and we get to and we say 10 psukim of Malchus, so we're going to be able to think in a moment about what it means to ask for the Baruch Hu to be the sovereign. What does it mean? We haven't thought about it. We haven't prepared ourselves. So the Jew's going to come on Yom Neiron, and he hasn't thought about Malchus Kvod Shemayim. He's not going to be ready to carry off one of the great avodas of the day. Let's take a moment there to think about Malchus. And Malchus, we say the Malchus and Musaf, and there's a Chonis and Shoifas, and books of Malchus, is one of the most difficult tefillas. Because Chazal said, say 10 psukim. What are we thinking? We say 10 psukim. What's going to remind we say 10 psukim? To me, that's one of the greatest examples of the value of piyutim. Last year we had to explain the value of piyutim because there was a move to minimize the piyutim. Right? If we minimize the piyutim, then we wouldn't have a der shamuna, we wouldn't have a shemelach, we wouldn't have speaking about how the Malachim, Shinei Shachar, we would have the 10 dry psukim of Malchus. So I assume in the time of Chazal, when Chazal gave 10 psukim, they were all Boki and Tanakh, and they had all sorts of machshavos. So they said, Hashem, they reviewed all of Kriyas Yamsuf. They said, the Shvuas Melech Boy, they reviewed all Parsha Bilam. But the Yapot, when I say the Pasuk, it's hard for me to figure out what I'm supposed to be thinking right now. So the Paitonim did me a tremendous favor. And they said, we're going to hammer in Malchus by saying Hashem Melech, Hashem Molech, and beautiful Piyutim, but the Malachim. And there's going to be a shift, because the Paitonim saw that the Jew of the second base of Mikdash, to get to the place where that Jew is going to get to, so they, and now you're talking about 1,000 years later, so for me to get to that place, I need Piyutim, right? A person taking the Sanatok. So for hundreds of years, Jews get into this spot of the Yom Adin through the Sanatoga. Can you imagine that in the Sanatoga? It's the Chronos. So by saying 10 psukim Zechron, you're supposed to get to the spot of the Yom Adin. So I assume that if you're a Jew, after Churban Beis HaMikdash, you can do it. But there's a Yeridas Hadaris. So we need these piyutim to embellish. So we have the psukim of Zechronos, the Malchis. There's a beautiful word from the Sfas Emes that I want to suggest just to give us ideas to think about. The Gemara says that we have 10 psukim. Why 10 psukim Malchus? Because of the Baruch Hu created the world with 10 admiros. That's why you have it 10 times. It's a Gemara said, the Mishnah Ovi says, why did the Baruch Hu create the world with 10 admiros? He could do it with 1 admir, right? So to give Rishonim bigger trouble when they don't recognize God, they are violating 10 admiros. I think it's Tzaddikim greater covet because we're schar, because we are exercising 10 admiros. Ma Pirush Advar, what's the Sasemis of the Marvel? Sasemis says that by saying 10 admiros, HaKadosh Baruch Hu has given the human being the possibility of missing the Rebbeinu Shalom, or he's given the possibility of Baruch Hu discovering a Kadosh Baruch Hu. Here's where I would understand it. One Amira is a Big Bang, right? 10 Amiras is evolution over a long period of time. So a person thinks of Big Bang, so that people say, I'm talking to the Shalom right now, just to get the idea across. That so Big Bang, some people will say, all right, that is the Rebbeinu Shalom. Big Bang is how did it happen that the Baruch Hu created this? That's a real sign of knowledge. But many people, if they see the world coming out 10 amiras and its stages and its development, and it takes thousands of years and it goes to evolution, so then they miss the Rebbeinu Shalom. They don't see a Kadosh Baruch Hu because they think it's random and it happens and it's not guided by the Rebbeinu Shalom. So this Sfas Emes says that's what it means that if Kadosh Baruch Hu gave 10 amiras instead of 1 amira. A Big Bang, even a Russia would be able to say that's the Rebbeinu Shalom. 10 amiras, it's slow, it takes time. You miss a Kadosh Baruch Hu. However, the Mishnah says, Sfas Emes explains, but the same 10 amiros can convince a person of the Rebbeinu Shalom. Because if you're looking for Kadosh Baruch Hu, you'll find the Kadosh Baruch Hu over and over and over again. In other words, you look at the first day of Bria, say Kadosh Baruch Hu, you look at different parts of Bria to finish off the moshel, to finish off the allegory of using. A person looks at the linear evolution and says every single time when a species about to get lost, there's a mutation just pooped ready in the right place, in the right spot. So if you're a Maimon, if you're not a Maimon, not Rani here, but if you're a Maimon, you say Kadosh Baruch Hu over and over again. So that's what the Mishnah is saying, Sfas Emes said, that the 10 miros, when they're used properly, it gives you much more insight into Kadosh Baruch Hu. You see a Kadosh Baruch Hu is the Bari phrase, and the Bari Yadam, you see different patterns in the Bria. So we have 10 psukim. So apparently those 10 psukim, it's Chazal being merames to us to see the Rebbeinu Shalom, these different psukim. The Moshel, we'll finish with the Moshel. Meantime, Rabbi Cohen and Rabbi Weinberg can figure out who's going next. So to finish off the Moshe, you say Hashem Yimlach Le'olam V'ed. Right? So your mind goes to Kriyas Yamsuf. You stop for a moment. You think about how HaKadosh Baruch Hu's Malchus was expressed at Kriyas Yamsuf. Think about the B'chiras Yisrael. You think about the change of nature. You think about the Egyptians drowning. Next pasuk was Shruas HaMelech Boy. Kadosh Baruch Hu's friendship to God. You say, believe it or not. Stop for a moment. I can say Kadosh Baruch Hu. I can see Shruas HaMelech Boy Kriyas Yamsuf because how low I can see Shruas HaMelech there because Kadosh Baruch Hu selected us and gave us, favored us. Or I see other places where Kadosh Baruch Hu showed unbelievable protection for Klal Yisrael. He said, wherever his mind goes, what stops for a moment and sees like Gilei Lekus, in a place we otherwise would not be able to see, we wouldn't think about it. So that's what the three ideas we wanted to cover is Pshat in Zachrenu and Pesveinu and Yizachem and Yikosei. They were asking for Kadosh Baruch Hu's aid and guidance, Yata D'Shmai, keeping his mitzvahs. That U'B'chein Tein Pachtacha is the day that we ask for Gilei Lekus very, very straight because Gilei Lekus, revealing Kadosh Baruch Hu, exercising Baruch Hu's Malchus is the way that I can achieve my brachos, and therefore my heart and my soul and my words are all in the same place. And to think about the 10 sukkim of Malchus, that to try to stop for a moment, and that we can do it in advance is even better. And to think for a moment how Kadosh Baruch Hu's sovereignty was shown by these sukkim. It's an avod, it's not easy, but if we have that in mind, so it will be a great way of being Mekayim. But Kadosh Baruch Hu says, Imru Lefanai, say these sukkim kedei shetam lichuni aleichem, so that we can be a part of expressing Kadosh Baruch Hu's malchus on Rosh Hashana, and there'll be tremendous chus, and it'll be a way of earning great brachos from Kadosh Baruch Hu.
Didn't work it out either. Not so much. Sure. Absolutely. So everyone says a little bit. Just Rabbi Neuburger and Rabbi Cohen. Part of the preparation for me in doing this is that I know how much the Rav likes to quote Druk. Part of the pachad is that I also like Rav Druk's sefer. It's a very good sefer. So I spent the afternoon looking at Rav Druk last time, and then I had to daven and schwitz it out while the Rav was referencing certain pieces. I thought I got knocked out twice already, but Baruch Hashem, I think I still have a little bit to share. So let's begin just by suggesting a thought. Again, much of what I'm sharing is from Rav Druk's beautiful Machzor. But I think this insight gives us perspective why it's so important to want to learn the Machzor. This is a tough night, especially after Slichos like last night. It was a late night for many people. I'm sure a very busy day for people. But it's important, before we come to Yom HaDin, to actually know what we're saying. So Rav Druk has a very insightful question on, again, some of the words the Rav has already mentioned. In the tefillah of V'chein tein pachtecha, we daven, we ask that eventually we hope that somehow Kadosh Baruch Hu's recognition will be felt by all. The world will be united in the performance of the Ratzon Hashem. Kamoshi Adam. These are very interesting words. I'm not really adding anything. I'm not really sure what it exactly is. Kamoshi Adam, as we know, right? Or before we know, Hashem Elokeinu Sha'ashilton, or Sha'ashalton, depending on the Nusach, Sha'ashilton, Sha'ashalton L'chanecha, Uz B'yadcha, Dur B'yinecha. What's the Kamoshi Adam? 2 words in your mouth, so you can actually circle and say, what do I need that for? We daven, we hope, Yeyasu, Kulam Aguda Achas Lasas Ritzoncha B'levav Shalem. We want the whole world to recognize Hashem. That's the V'chein tein pachtecha. Hashem should place his dread, his awe, his impression upon Kol Ma'asecha. The world should recognize him. Kamoshi Adanu, what is that offering? What is that adding to our understanding of this Kulam Aguda Achas fulfilling the Ratzon Hashem? He says a very simple and true insight, and it's part of the reason we need to prepare before we come to Rosh Hashanah itself. And that is Kamoshi Adam. There's a lot of things that as human beings we know to be true in our mind, but it's very difficult to act upon. I would say probably most of the errors that we do over the course of a year is rooted in that. A disconnect between our mind and our actions, or our mind and our heart. To know something in a theoretical sense, but there's a tremendous gap that exists between the world of the theoretical and the application of that knowledge. That's an important pasuk. And the tzaddikim say there's a tremendous gap between the v'yadata and the v'hashivos el ha'levav. There's a tremendous gap between the v'yadata and the asiyah l'maaseh, to be able to actually do it. It's interesting, even that pasuk, v'yadata hayom, you know that the word hayom is often code word for Rosh Hashana. Hayom, as Chazal points out, the Zohar points out, Rashi at the beginning of Sefer Iyov, the Satan comes Hayom before Hashem to try to malign, to try to slander Iyov. Hayom is a code word in Rosh Hashanah. So v'yadata hayom, when it comes to the knowledge that we have in Rosh Hashanah, the things that we're supposed to know, and we do know it, we know it in our mind, we see it in the text, but to take it to heart, and more so, again, we read the words carefully, not just ye'asu kul maguda achas, but ye'asu kul maguda achas la'asos ritzoncha b'lev avshalim, says the text, says the Machzor, to be able to do the Ratzon Hashem with a full heart, Moshe Adam. As we know it here. We know it in our mind. But am I able to actually make that a reality? Lasos, la'asiyah. The Rav actually just gave me some chizik because he reminded us that the Gemara says, Imru lefanai malchus. Sometimes it is enough, as much as Yibarni Dofi, but the lip service is also Imru lefanai. Say the words. If you say the words, that's also something. But when it really comes to the centerpiece of the tshuva process, when the Gemara describes Rosh Hashana and Daf Yud Zayin, the Kadosh Baruch Hu wrapped in a house, and the Kadosh Baruch Hu telling us again the words that are probably the most prominent in our mind, the greatest tool that Hashem ever gave us to turn to Him. Hashem, Kiel Nachum B'cham. So if you read that Gemara carefully, Hashem taught us to do what? Hashem didn't teach us to recite. Again, Imru Lefanai Malchus. Say before me, Malchus. We could talk about Zichronos, we could talk about Shofros, and that has value in and of itself. But that Gemara, look carefully, Gemara Rosh Hashana Yud Zayin and the Beth. When Hashem teaches Klal Yisrael the secret of the Yud Gimel Midos Shalachim, it's Ya'asu Lefanai, the Seder Hazeh. Do the Yud Gimel Midos Shalachim. Live the Yud Gimel. That's what the whole Sefer Tomer Devorah is about. Ramah. Moshe Cordovero, a great Makubal, from about 500 years ago, the Ramah wrote a sefer explaining to us how we're supposed to be able to live these attributes. Ya'asu lefanai kaseder hazeh, to apply. There's a mashal, I think it's well known, but it's important to repeat it in this context. The mashal of the Chavetz Chaim. The Chavetz Chaim says, imagine a person who is assigned the task of watching over a person's store. And the owner assigns this fellow, it's his first day with some type of managerial responsibilities, and he gives him a long list, a checklist of things that are his responsibilities. The owner returns to the store after going on vacation for a week. He trusted the seller to tend to whatever needed to be taken care of. He comes back and he says, "No, how'd it go?" He says to his boss, "Boss, the list you gave me, took care of it." "No, took care of it?" "Yeah. Every day I sat down, I read through the list, top to bottom." "Oh, I was supposed to do something with the list?" "You gave me the list." He said, make sure you go over the list." I went over the list. I read through the list every day. Hashem, Kel, Rachum, B'chanun. It remains in that realm of the theoretical. And therefore we remind ourselves again, Kamoshi Adan, it's a powerful phrase. It seems like two little throwaway words, but it's a powerful phrase if we meditate on it. La'asos ritzoncha Kamoshi Adan. I should be able to actualize the things that I know. All of the shiurim, all of the insights, all of the svarim that I've read, all of the things that we hear, and everything that the Machzor is telling us and revealing to us, to be able to apply that to our life. The day of Rosh Hashana Hayom, to take it to heart, that's a very powerful thing. The Leib Chassid, the great Mashgiach, used to say that we make a mistake even in our terminology, the phrases that we use. Sometimes I like to remind my Talmidim when we talk about the Torah says, the Rambam in the Perush Mishnah often says, Kadosh Baruch Hu says, Amar Hashem Yisparach. It's an amazing way that the Rambam reminds us that it's not the Torah. That's just a book on Hashem. It's the way that Hashem communicates with the Jewish people. Amar Hashem Yisparach. That's very different than the Shulchan Aruch says. Hashem says. For Rabbi Chassid says we often refer to the thing that we do during these days as saying slichus. We're not saying slichos. Slichos is not something that we say. Rabbi Leib Chaskin once reviewed someone, he said, we're not saying slichos, we're asking slichos. We're asking slicha, please Hashem, forgive me. It's a very different way of trying to not just pay tribute with lip service, but to actually try to apply it in a more personal way. Baruch Nezbush, who was a relative of the Baal Shem Tov, one of the early Hasidic masters. So one time the person had slighted him. And he said to Rav Baruch, he said, I could ask the Rav for Mechila. I hope that you're bochel me, as we often do. So he said to him, Salachti Kitvaracha. So the person thought, that was a Mechila Gemara, Salachti Kitvaracha. So someone was there and explained, no, Salachti Kitvaracha means the Slicha is in accordance to Kitvaracha. However sincere your words are, that's how good the Slicha is. If the words are heartfelt words, right, then the Slicha will be a heartfelt Slicha. So, as the klal is at the end of the Zechas Avos, Lafum Tzar Agar, in accordance, the effort is the reward. The more we prepare ourselves, the more we'll be able to get something out of the experience of the Yom Norah. As Salvation could always say, explain, there could be no holiness, there could be no kedusha. We know kedusha Yom, there could be no kedusha b'chalal without proper preparation. I was reading Mark Wilds from the Manhattan Jewish Experience. Put out a little book this year. Cute little book, a very sweet little book called The 40-Day Challenge. A little insight each day from the beginning of Elul through Yom Kippur. So the first piece he talks about preparation. The example he gives is a secular one, but it's one that should motivate us. He describes how Tom Brady, the great Super Bowl champion quarterback, the machine of things that he does to get ready for the Super Bowl. He sends his family out of the house. He moves them out of the house for 2 weeks beforehand so he can have utter concentration. And nothing should share his concentration to prepare for the big game. And the degree that he practices. One of his teammates, he once said, I want to practice with you 5:30 in the morning. The fellow showed up. He slept in a little bit. He showed up at 6:30. Tom Brady greeted him, good afternoon. For those who don't seek, and you can have an appreciation of such a thing. But the preparation, the Havdil a million times over, but the preparation that a Jew needs to make in order to come to these days is a very significant thing. And again, the more that we understand the ideas, then hopefully we'll be able to la'asos Moshe Adan with everything. The second thought, in the sense of continuation of the theme. The Rav was talking about Zachreinu and Kasveinu. That's when I got nervous. So I'll share a different insight that I saw also in Jerk's maths. What's the difference between a Zechira and a Ksiva? And why do I really need both? The Rav asked it more from the perspective, if you have a Ksiva, why do you need a Zechira? Let's ask it in the opposite direction also. B'chlal, what is the difference between them? And again, if I have a Zechira, what does a Ksiva add? So Richard explains the Zechira, again, is sort of more in the theoretical realm. I remember something, but it's possible that I'll come to forget it. I know for myself that if I don't take notes before I get up here to speak, I'll probably forget everything that I want to share with you. So I'm very much dependent on my ksiva. I want to remember to do certain things over the course of the day. I make myself a list of things, of responsibilities. Rav Soloveitchik said that when he was by that famous Farbrengen of the Lubavitch Rebbe, on the ride back, Rav Soloveitchik said, one of the things he saw in the spell from the Rebbe was that the Lubavitch Rebbe could speak for hours and hours and hours without any notes, quoting Mamay Chazal, quoting Psukim with such a fluidity. It was remarkable. But Soloveitchik was blown away by that. Soloveitchik prepared, the famous Yartzeit Joshua. He would have pages and pages of written notes. And he was totally blown away by that a person could have such a mind, such a memory. But says Rav Druk, the world of Zechira is less permanent than the world of Ksiva. And therefore, when we write something down, it gives it a degree of purpose. What we're asking of a Kadosh Baruch Hu is that if Zachreinu l'chaim, of course, in the world of Hashem, this is not really necessary because by Kadosh Baruch Hu, Ein Shechacham, Hashem doesn't forget. But from the human perspective, the way that we petition a Kadosh Baruch Hu during these days, we ask Hashem, we're nervous. That if it's only going to be a Zechira, we're scared that maybe something will come and take away that Zechira. Again, in the world of Kadosh Baruch Hu, don't forget. But from a in a very honest and human way, we say to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, please write it down also. Give it a further degree of permanence, so that no kitru could come and say, I object. Once it's written, once it's signed, I did, so to speak, it's no longer able to be removed and able to be erased. And I think that's also a very practical tip for us. There are many, many feelings that we want to bring, obviously, to the Yom Norah. And sometimes there's things that I might be thinking about and contemplating throughout the month of Elul, but I'm standing there, I'm a little nervous on Rosh Hashanah, as I'm standing there, Mamish B'fnei Hashem or Yom Kippur, my Nehila, this was the most important thing today. Somehow I left it out of my Shemona Esrei. Make yourself a little list. Maybe the obvious things that of course I'm going to daven for this thing, but sometimes it gets lost in the shuffle. Right? I can't pull up the name of the whole I've been davening for all year. Put it down on a piece of paper. Let it serve as not only as a chira, but let it be a ksiva. And that'll make it more easy for us to connect to it and to make sure that nothing is really left behind. But again, as a tefillah, we're asking HaKadosh Baruch Hu, don't allow the good things that we've done to remain in the realm of sechira, where the sultan, whatever that means, that the sister Achar can come and be a HaKadosh Baruch Hu, give it a ksiva, give it some degree of permanence, so that nothing can take it away. Share with you a beautiful insight. The Rav referenced the famous words of the Uvachain, the Uvachain, this recurring theme of Uvachain. Again, that feeling of Uvachain Avo El Melech, that Esther comes to the king without permission, the feeling of unworthiness that perhaps we have in standing before Hashem on the Yom Hadin. It's an interesting insight. When we recite Birchas Hamazon, so we say to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, Va'ala kol Hashem Elokeinu anachnu modim lach. Hashem, we want to thank you. It's like a part of the Noda L'cha. We thank you so much, HaKadosh Baruch Hu, for everything. And then we seem to ruin the whole thing. Because we end, and maybe it goes back in a sense of the Kamoshi Adanu. We say, Takasuv, as it says, why am I doing this? I paint the simple mashal. Imagine a child comes over to an adult and says, I just really wanted to thank you for what you did for me. That's so sweet of you. Wow, you're such a bench. That's so beautiful. It's so thoughtful. Such midos tovos. Oh, the truth is my parents told me I have to come over and say thank you. I didn't think that. So you undermine the whole thing. So we say, Hashem, I want to thank you for everything that you do for us. We feel so fortunate. And the no delacha of our benching is much more than just thank you for the food. And then, we're doing it because you told us we have to. How is it not that? We had a nice meal. All right, we have to bench. Maybe next time I'll stick with shahako and steak and fries, and I can just get away from greater fashos. My life would be so much easier that way. People sometimes are very scared to wash because of the sense of obligation. Right? But we undermine the whole thank you by saying, I'm thanking you because you commanded me to do so. Where he says, maybe the uvachein is also part of it. It's similar to the other way that he said it, the way that the Wudraham already alluded to. But maybe we're saying to Hashem, you know what? There's a part of me that not only feels unworthy of being here, but maybe sometimes doesn't even feel so comfortable. I kind of have to show up at Shul and Rosh Hashana Yom Kippur. Now, if I'm in a healthy spiritual place, I want to show up at Rosh Hashana Yom Kippur. There's a part of me that's sometimes scared to show up at Rosh Hashana Yom Kippur. There's things that I don't really want to have to remember and apologize for and engage in. There's parts of the experience which can be very overwhelming, emotionally challenging, spiritually draining. There's a part of me that doesn't want to be here. Uvachein, but nonetheless, I feel a sense of obligation to be here because the HaKadosh Baruch Hu expects me to be here. The same way that Esther had no choice but to go to Achashverosh because the Gadol Hador, because Mordechai, her beloved husband, relative, and really the Gadol Hador told her she must do so. You don't really have a choice, Esther. And she was mavatal her ratzon to that seavoy of someone she trusted. So in a certain sense, the uvachein is our way of saying, and I think it's very human. It addresses again that very real part of ourselves that sometimes feels very overwhelmed by Rosh Hashana. It feels overwhelmed by the obligation of saying or asking so many slichos over the course of these days. But uvachein, I have no choice other than to show up because hakasuv, it's written. This is what a Jew is supposed to do during these days. This is your expectation of Kadosh Baruch Hu, and that itself is meaningful. Kasher tziva Hashem. That doesn't take away from the seriousness of my commitment. In a certain sense, it enhances my commitment because it acknowledges that I'm doing it simply because Kadosh Baruch Hu has asked me to do so. Just checking the clock to see where we're holding. It's late. Okay, so very, very quickly. I'll end with one final, very quick thought. Chassam Sofer addresses the question uvachein tein tachtacha versus uvachein tein kavod Hashem Yalech. What's the difference between the uvachein tein pachad, uvachein tein kavod? And he explains very simply, it's the distinction between yiras ha'onesh and yiras ha'romas. Yiras ha'onesh, do I feel a sense of trepidation before Kadosh Baruch Hu because I don't want to be punished? Or is it uvachein tein kavod, is it the sense of what? A recognition of Kadosh Baruch Hu's grandeur in the world that inspires me and invites me in, that allows me to want to be pulled in. beautiful insight from the Matal Slanim, the Mordechai Chaim of Slanim. When we sing Friday night, we pull Makadish. Mishoch chastecha liodecha, kel kano v'noken. What a strange lashon. Mishoch chastecha liodecha. Hashem, perform and bring upon us your chesed, your rachamim, because you're a kel kano v'noken, because you're a God of vengeance. What does chesed have to do with kel kano v'noken? But he explains, and again, he elaborates with the mashal, we don't have time for it now, but just very simply, there's two different ways that a Kadosh Baruch Hu can teach us and remind us that a Kadosh Baruch Hu is a Kadosh Baruch Hu. If we do the wrong things, a Kadosh Baruch Hu can punish us, and that will wake us up. But there's another way for Kadosh Baruch Hu to wake us up, and this is really a tefillah anyway. Kadosh Baruch Hu, you can also pour so much chesed on top of us that I will be so pained by the fact that Hashem, you're so generous to me, and I still don't treat you properly. It's a form of punishment in the form of a chesed. A king who's rebelled against by one of his subjects, right? And instead of punishing the fellow, he raises him to a greater position. He says, this beloved king who loves me so much, who cares and provides for me so greatly, and I undermine his authority. That itself is a form of tshuva. As the Baal Shem Tov explained, Kel nekamos Hashem, similar idea. Kel nekamos Hashem, Kel nekamos Sophia. Wow, this is exciting. Kel nekamos Hashem, Kel nekamos Sophia. Let's see who's going to come to the rest. See? We're somewhere between Zos Chanukah Tish and like Tisha over here. That's okay. It's okay. I can say that this much. I remember the right. Thank you. So Kel Nekamos Hashem, Kel Nekamos Sophia means Kel Nekamos Hashem. Hakadosh Baruch Hu is a God again who sometimes exacts punishment. Kel Nekamos. You know how Hashem sometimes does that? By Kel Nekamos Sophia, simply by revealing. And when I realize how much Hakadosh Baruch Hu provides for me, if Hashem doubles down on the chesed, I say, how could I not treat Hashem properly? Hashem is so good to me. Right? How could I not be more careful in my Shmir HaShabbos? How can I not be more careful in my Rosh Hashana? How can I mumble my Shemona Esrei or mumble the bracha when Hashem has been so generous? I think that's a nice feeling in a world that's still filled with a lot of uncertainty to dive into Hashem. If you want to punish us, Hashem, if we're found guilty, so give us more chesed to the point that we'll feel so much greater, we're greatly indebted to you, that we'll want to return to you with greater passion and grace. Okay, time is up, and look forward to hearing from you.
The last couple of weeks we've begun to learn Tanakh Kabura. Last couple of weeks it was in the context of preparing for Yom Noam, learning Yonah, and seeing what Yonah could teach us to use in our own preparation for Yimei HaRachamim. If there's interest, perhaps we'll continue after Yom Tov as well. But I thought perhaps that gives us getting into the zone of learning Tanakh maybe gives us a unique angle, a unique perspective of learning the Machzor. Maybe we could, in the final segment of tonight's three-way Machzor Shiur, we could fuse those two modalities of a Tanakh Shiur and a Machzor Shiur, and to spend the last couple minutes we have together looking at three of the critical prakim that lie at the center of the Rosh Hashana Machzor. The Rav opened with a focus on the critical psukim that Chazal demanded us, the Malchus, the Chronos, and Shofars. I want to end the evening by looking at three larger chunks that really define, in many ways, stand at the core of the Machzor. But before we get to Pirkei Tanakh and what is in the Machzor, I want to open by thinking what's not in the Machzor. There's something, a Rosh Hashanah riddle, if you will. There's something missing. There's something that appears before Rosh Hashanah in great amounts, after Rosh Hashanah in even greater amounts. But strangely, Rosh Hashanah itself is entirely devoid of it. But yeah, before Rosh Hashanah and after Rosh Hashanah, but not on Rosh Hashanah. Big deal, yes. Oh.
Slichos.
Slichos? Vida. at the heart of what always comes together, what follows Yudamidas, and forms the close in many ways of the Slichas. There's no Vida. There's no Vida. Talk about Tshuva. These are days of Tshuva. There's no Vida. What happened? No Hashana, here and there. It's Yom Tov. It's true, Hashana is Yom Tov. Yom Kippur is Yom Tov as well. Tonight say Yom Kippur needs it. So Rosh Hashana doesn't do it. Rosh Hashana is different than Yom Kippur. How? Why? What? It seems so odd. This is the day, Rosh Hashana is the day when we're beginning to follow. The din is unfolding right now. The din is unfolding the course of Rosh Hashana. It's going to continue into Yom Kippur. This is unfolding over the course of Rosh Hashana, and we're not talking about that. Okay. Let's hold on to that question while we turn our attention to a parak of Tehillim that this year we blow shul for both days, and therefore this year we're going to recite this parak of Tehillim 14 times over the course of Rosh Hashana. Tehillim Mem Zayin, Lav Natzeh from Nekarach Mizmar. When do we ever say a parak of Tehillim 7 times in a row? The Mateh Ephraim is one of the classic Sifrei Halacha and the Halachas of Tishur, Hashem Kippur Sukkot, and Rabbi Brat, Ephraim Zalman, and in the Simon Tafkuf Hey, he speaks of the first Simon about Shofar. So he speaks about the centuries-old minhagim to make all sorts of hachanas for Tkiyah Shofar. He speaks of particular hachanas in some communities, the Tokeah and the Bal Tefillah and Makri would step out and make their own hachanas, and they would come back. And everyone else was davening, was saying Till, was focusing on Kabbalah, different sorts of hachanas that different communities had. And he puts at the center of all of this Lamanatzeh Nekarach Mizmar. That Tehillim Mem Zayin, the very central, very highlighted hachana for the Tkiyah Shofar. What's it all about? You open up the Machzor to day 1 or to day 2. This Mizmar, what jumps at you right away, clearly we're talking about, there's plenty of discussion in this Mizmar about Malchus Hashem, again and again and again. We hear about Malchus Hashem. Clearly we hear about Malchus Hashem in the context of Kol Shofar and Trua. And we hear a lot about Malchus Hashem for the entire world. Malchus Hashem al Kol Haaretz. Malchus Hashem for all the Am, all the nations. Now, when is this being said? The Mizmor sounds like it's describing an event, a historical event that's happening at some point. The nations are reaching out. When, what time period? Ibn Ezra in Tehillim, he says there are different approaches. He says some understood this was the time of Galus Bavel, perhaps leaving Galus Bavel to build the second Beis Hamikdash. And some understood this describes David HaMelech in his, as he's preparing for the construction of the first Beis Hamikdash. Ibn Ezra says the truth is he thinks that this is a reference to Yemos Mashiach. The Radak as well says it's talking about Yemos Mashiach. Because if you look at the Mizmar, so what does it talk about? The Malbim sort of unpacks in greater detail what the Rishonim are already pointing to. They say, the way the Malbim looks at it, the world history is in part a history of war, a history of many wars. Sometimes wars are caused by religious differences. Sometimes wars are caused by ego and who's in charge of Ibarosh and who's going to be whose ego and who's going to have political power. Lasid Lavo, the Mizmar describes Kol Adam Tikukaf. This Mizmar is described in a time in the world history of all the nations hold hands. Kol Adam Tikukaf, the plain word here. The Tikukaf, all the nations are holding hands, reaching out to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, rallying around HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And why? Ki Hashem Elyon Nora, Melech Gadol Kol Haaretz. On the one hand, HaKadosh Baruch Hu is a supreme God, an awesome God. At the same time, he's a great king of the entire world. So, the Malbim suggests Hashem Elyon, HaKadosh Baruch Hu is supreme God, transcendent God over the ruling entire universe. And at the same time, Nora, if he's awesome, if he inspires awe, that means he relates to me. He's not only out there, but he's also here. The HaKadosh Baruch Hu, who's transcendent, is also intimate and immanent and impacts me. So the first half of the pasuk captures that there's going to be a recognition of HaKadosh Baruch Hu that will put that will end the religious differences that drive war. And in terms of the politics and the desire for power, Melech Gadol Kol Haaretz. HaKadosh Baruch Hu will be clearly, self-evidently, the real ruler of the universe. And where? Because Yivchar Lanu Es Nachal Aseinu. Because HaKadosh Baruch Hu will make Yerushalayim, HaKadosh Baruch Hu will make Yerushalayim the obvious epicenter of the universe, the obvious center of the world, where the Rav Shechter describes in the Dikvei Atzon, even in a halachic sense, Yerushalayim has two different faces to it. Yerushalayim is meant to be the spiritual capital, the Makam Mikdash. It's meant to be the political center of Eretz Yisrael. Malchus Beis David is supposed to be headquartered in Yerushalayim, and Yivchar Lo is not going to say both. HaKadosh Baruch Hu, I think, will come back to Yerushalayim in a way that will make it clear that HaKadosh Baruch Hu is God, and that will make it clear that HaKadosh Baruch Hu is in charge. In both aspects, both drivers of war will just fade away. And then the two can go on to talk about how the nations will coronate HaKadosh Baruch Hu, what the Hamlacha, international Hamlacha, will look like. Alalakim Bisrua, Zamalakim Zameru. And the final two psukim describe after the initial events of being Mamluch HaKadosh Baruch Hu, what it will be like when HaKadosh, ongoing reality of HaKadosh Baruch Hu being recognized. Malach HaKim HaKayim, and so on and so on. Everyone gathered, continuing to rally around HaKadosh Baruch Hu. So this parak with which we prepare for Shofar again and again and again, a description of what? A description of when? Moshe Mashiach. A description of La'asid level. What it's going to be like in the future. Which is really remarkable. That the Hachana for Shofar, the central Hachana for Shofar is talking about Mashiach. Yes, Mashiach is a theme. But that's the central theme that we say not once, not twice, I think that's 7 times. Fascinating. Couldn't have picked another parak until it talks about Shofar. Couldn't have picked another parak until it talks about Malchus Shamayim. And then there's a second parak. The Gemara tells us, stepping back from Tehillim and Zayin, a minhag of centuries, to a Gemara. The Gemara tells the end of Masechet Megillah, the Chazal mandate, the Haftarah of the second day of Rosh Hashana, is the 31st parak of Yirmiyahu. From our Hashem Matzachim Bamidbar, building up the Ben Yaakov Ephraim. Zachar is Gerenero. And why is that the Haftarah for the second day of Rosh Hashana? Gemara says it is. Why? The Beis Yosef quotes Aran. Well, the closing pasuk, Ben Yaakov Ephraim, Zachronos, Zachar es Gerenero, Zachronos. That explains the end, but that's not a one pasuk haftarah, not 2 pasuk haftarah. So why do we start from the beginning of Parak Lamed? And the truth is, if you open up a Sefer Yirmiyahu, this is Parak Lamed 31. So the Chav Prakim, the 20s, were largely nevuos that Yirmiyahu is delivering to the final set of kings of the Jewish people, the very end, in the years and decades that lead up to the destruction of first Beis Hamikdash. Speaking to this king and that king, and telling them that you're sinning and you're doing out there, it's not going to destroy the Beis Hamikdash, and he was not a very popular figure. You're thrown to jail. It's not pretty. And that leads us up to Parak Haftarah. All of a sudden, Parak Lamed, the tone changes. And the Parak Lamed opens, HaKadosh Baruch Hu tells Yirmiyahu, I have some nevuos, you should write them down. The Malbim says, yeah, because what's about to follow is a series of positive nevuos, not for them. This is before Beis Hamikdash is destruction of Beis Hamikdash is looming large. We're in crisis mode. Things are falling apart. Kadosh Baruch Hu tells Yirmiyahu, there are positive nevuos also. Put them in your pocket, write them down, and the Jews will access them in the future when they begin to be nitgashim, they begin to be realized. And the second of those prakim, of those positive prakim, Yirmiyahu is told in advance of Korban, write this down. This will yet come. Parak Lamed Aleph, the haftarah for the second day of Rosh Hashanah. And he describes, we know these psukim. And if you'd like, you feel free to We turn the pages in the Machzor to the second day of the laning of the second day of Rosh Hashanah. Matzah Chaim Bamidbar. Kalal Yisrael are finding Chaim. We're renewing our relationship. We're finding a positive relationship with HaKadosh Baruch Hu, charm with HaKadosh Baruch Hu in the Midbar. We're already in the desert. When are we in the desert? The Malbim says, yeah, because the beginning of Yirmiyahu, left Echad from Midbar, old star in the desert, and HaKadosh Baruch Hu brought us into Eretz Yisrael. Now we're back in the desert. Desert metaphorically meaning we're on the outs. We're in gulls. We feel far from HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And Yirmiyahu said, yeah, but you're out in gulls and things are falling apart, and life seems upside down on a personal level. Life seems upside down on a national level, on a universal world level. And out in the midbar, out in the desert, there's going to be a renewal of the relationship. Just last night, we were singing that Ahavas Olam Avtich, Achem Meshachti Chosed. That's the second pasuk in the Haftarah of day 2 of Rosh Hashanah. Ahavas Olam Avtich. What does that mean? Ahavas Olam, a love of the world. So Yaakov Kamensky, in a sefer on Nevi'im Ksubim, points out Olam means forever in all times, and Olam means in all places. Actually points to a mission in the first paragraph of Chulin, talks in a halachic context, a technical context. You can shech the Olam. The mission is you can shech during the day, you can shech at night, you can shech in this place, on the rooftop, you can shech on the deck of a boat. The Olam means every when and everywhere. Ahavas Olam Ahavtich. Yirmiyahu says, you're out in the midbar, it's a time of Galus. HaKadosh Baruch Hu says, the love never stops. There's no time in history when the love stops. There's no time in my life, my personal life trajectory, when HaKadosh Baruch Hu lets go of me. I don't always see it. I don't always feel it. But the love is there. And there's no place. We're in Eretz Yisrael. We're out of Eretz Yisrael. A Jew is in Siberia. Ahavas Olam Ahavtich. And then Yirmiyahu begins to unfold from the place of Galus what Geula will look like. And a shining nevuah that brings us to Rachel Mavaka Albaneh, that brings us Beinakim Yefraim. It's a description. The Haftarah, the second day of Rosh Hashanah, is once again like that Mizmar Ben Zayin, with which we introduce Shofar. It's largely a description of Geula. A description of Geula. The Yemos Mashiach, again and again. Yemos Mashiach to prepare for Shofar. Yemos Mashiach is a haftar for the second day of Rosh Hashanah. What's it all about? Again, Yemos Mashiach is an important part of our history. But why is that such a dominant theme of Rosh Hashanah? Why is that haftar for Shofar? Probably many layers to the answer. I want to talk about what? Both of these prakim of Nach are forcing us to look forward. To look forward and to look only forward. It's all about the future. It's you could almost say that Rosh Hashanah, when there's no vidur, there's no looking back. Leading up to Rosh Hashanah, there's a lot of looking back. There's a lot of Hasham Bagat. And through Aseret Semeichu, you have Rosh Hashanah. There's a lot of Hasham Bagat and climaxing Yom Kippur. But Rosh Hashanah would take a break from the vidurim. It's all forward looking. It's almost like Rosh Hashanah, like this brief bubble of radical proactivity. It's all about what am I going to do now. The vidur is important, but for Rosh Hashanah, Hamlochas Hashem means what am I going to do now? Here I am. What's tomorrow? Here I am. What's the next step? Action steps. And why? Why? One could say, to borrow the phrase, a custom of shlishi. You have a stira, but we looked at two prakim that have a similar theme. The custom of shlishi is the first haftarah of Rosh Hashanah. The story of Chana, the first two prakim of the Sefer Shmuel. In Chana, we know it's the before and after. There's Chana in crisis, and then there's Chana in song. And Chana davens twice. There's a Chana's tefillah. We think of Chana's tefillah when she comes to the Mishkan, and Eli wants to know how come Eli misunderstands she must be crying. Eli's not familiar with this modality of quiet tefillah. Our Shemona Esrei, the Gemara tells us, is every Jewish Shemona Esrei is built on the model of Chana. Chana is the model of quiet tefillah. Quiet tefillah in a time of crisis. But then the Haftarah ends with, after Shmuel is born, the Shiras Chana. But the Psukim we're going to refer to as Shiras Chana. Batis Balel Chana. Again, it's tefillah. Two tefillos of Chana. They're very, very different. Radically different moves. One is a bakasha and one is a shira. And one she's broken and the other she's uplifted. In the first tefillah, she focuses on herself. The second tefillah, she's focused on her Rosh Hashana. Very little discussion about herself. She doesn't really refer to her own situation at all. But they're both. Those two tefillahs are very different in many ways, but they're both forward-looking. The tefillah in Parak Aleph, she's very focused on Torah Kadosh Baruch Hu, what she's hoping and praying for the future. And in the second parak, the shira, the tefillah of Chana about Shmuel, again, she doesn't talk about Shmuel. She talks about how Kadosh Baruch Hu runs the world. And she talks about how Kadosh Baruch Hu runs the world, and a lot of it is, here's what I anticipate Kadosh Baruch Hu will do in the future. It's so forward-looking, the entire Haftarah. It's always about the next step. So Rabbi Ariel, in his very fascinating set of svarim on a number of Sifrei Tanakh, Rabbi Ariel is one of the leading rabbanim of the Midrashet Hagolan in Chesed. Very, very charming and provocative svarim of Tanakh. The beginning of his Sefer Oz Melech and Sefer Shmuel. He points out that when you think about Shmuel and the origin of Shmuel, the birth of Shmuel Haftarah, he reminds you a lot of the origin of a different Jewish leader, Shimshon. Not just because Shimshon and Shmuel both start with the Shem, but both of them were born to women, to parents who were struggling with infertility. In both cases, there's this idea, even before he's born, of his being a Nazir. In both cases, there's they're meant to play a key role in moving the needle in terms of the domination of the Plishtim over the Jews. Shimshon is the one who begins to push back against the Plishtim, and the Shmuel is the one who's going to finish. He's going to complete that. He's going to be Karni Shaul, later David. He's going to complete that process that as soon as Shimshon began. Yet they're so similar, but they're so radically different. Not only because their lives end in very, very different ways, but even from the outset, so different. Because the story of Shimshon just sort of falls in the lap of Shimshon's mother, whoever she is. Isha's mother, you know what her name is. She doesn't really do much. The Malach comes and tells her, you're going to have a child. The Malach comes and tells her, he's going to be a Nazir. They bring a carbon eventually, but only as a thank you when it's all over. They're entirely passive. Chana is just the opposite. She's driving everything. Elkanah, Eli, Chana said, we're going to do something about this. I'm going to daven. I'm going to Mishkan, and I'm going to reach out to Kadosh Baruch Hu, and I'm going to make this happen. The tefillah comes from her, and the Neman Naziris comes from her, and the Karbanos are, and even in terms of the larger family, Elkanah is already very engaged in Karbanos are bringing Jews to Karbanos according to Chazal from beforehand. They're similar, but the radical difference in terms of, are they passive recipients of whatever HaKadosh Baruch Hu was planning, or are they actively engaged in Elkanah and particularly Chana in reaching out to HaKadosh Baruch Hu? And that's what you see in her tefillos. So in her first tefillah, she's reaching out, this is what I want from God. In the second tefillah, it's no longer about her, but it's a recognition that HaKadosh Baruch Hu is in charge. That's the primary theme of her second tefillah. That HaKadosh Baruch Hu, HaKadosh Baruch Hu, HaKadosh Baruch Hu, that he's the driver of change on the national level, on the cosmic level. HaKadosh Baruch Hu is a driver of change on the personal level, but there's no loss of agency. But it moves instead from asking for things to figuring out. So if HaKadosh Baruch Hu is in charge of the universe, so then where do I fit in? HaKadosh Baruch Hu is in charge of the universe, so then Ratzon Hashem is the most significant thing in the world. And sometimes it's going to be very obvious what I can do to further Ratzon Hashem. Sometimes it's going to be very mysterious, sometimes baffling. What does HaKadosh Baruch Hu want me to do? It's a confusing situation. It's a painful situation. What does HaKadosh Baruch Hu want me to do? But that's the primary message of Hanan, of Hanan's second tefillah. The HaKadosh Baruch Hu is running the world, and where do I fit in? It's active. It's here I am, and HaKadosh Baruch Hu is in charge, and what's the next step? That's what emerges from these three sections of Tanakh that lie at the core of our Machzor. The Haftarah of the first day, the Haftarah of the second day, and Lamatzeach and Lavnikach Mizmar. It's all about what's the next step. What's the next step? What's HaKadosh Baruch Hu is in charge, and where do I fit in, and how do I act? It's forward-looking. It's proactively reaching out to HaKadosh Baruch Hu about the future, as Chana does in her first tefillah, and it's dedicating ourselves to the mission of making Ratzon Hashem a reality. That's what Kabbalah's Olmach Shamayim really is about. Figuring out how I'm meant to live the way HaKadosh Baruch Hu wants me to. And that's in a deep sense, that's Hamlachas Hashem. It's an energizing Hamlachas Hashem. Not just an abstract fact that HaKadosh Baruch Hu runs the world. Yes, that's true. And therefore what? Here I am right now. Rosh Hashanah is not a day for Vidr. There will be days for Vidr beforehand, and there'll be days for Vidr after. The Rosh Hashanah is a day to say, here I am, and HaKadosh Baruch Hu is in charge, and now what? What do I do next? In energizing Hamlacha, finding my place in HaKadosh Baruch Hu's world, investing myself in realizing Ratzon Hashem, maybe Taka Bizocha. To be Mamlech Hashem, maybe Taka Bizocha, to a year in which we recognize HaKadosh Baruch Hu's leadership of the world, we recognize HaKadosh Baruch Hu's management of the world, maybe a year in which HaKadosh Baruch Hu's goodness is revealed to us, and a year in which is in a way that's clear and self-evident, in a way that we're able to appreciate its sweetness in the moment.